Hello, and welcome to the So Emotional podcast. Here on the cast, we discuss everything emotions through the lens of attachment, the nervous system, and internal parts work. We're a little irreverent and like to have fun exploring the emotional issues and dynamics that interest us. So come along and hang out. Let's explore the fascinating lands of emotions.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the So Emotional podcast. I'm your host, Angela Wetzel with Epic Initiator Coaching. This is Nick Carl. He's
Hello.
also our host, and he is the safe anchor. And he is an experienced somatic experiencer drinking liquid death today, not one of our sponsors. Neither is Topo Chico, and you'll see me drinking that too. We just like sparkling water. Today we are... Well, first and foremost, our podcast is really about removing the stigma and enigma around emotions and to really help you on your emotional journey so you can experience, well, all the emotions without restriction or constriction. And so you can hopefully have some more fun and joy and like know what the fuck is going on, which is really helpful. Today's podcast, we really want to talk about victimization because personally, this is like such a huge thing that we need to talk about and recognize in our own energetic field. Like it's an emotion that we need to understand and understand well if we have any chance of being able to like enjoy our higher emotional states and also have a shot at conscious creating, because victimization is a very low vibrational energy, but it has a lot of uses and purposes. So it's not like it doesn't have value, but if you stay there too long, it can definitely cause stagnation and lots of suffering, like much suffering.
Right.
Do you want to go first?
I want to caveat that the victimization we're talking about is at our personal internal point of creation, right? It's like
Hey, say that again.
The victimization that we are talking about is an internal thing, right? It's like your relationship with your own self. So there's like a power here, right?
As opposed to, you said internal, as opposed to, what do you mean?
As opposed to being victimized by, I don't know, this gets a little tricky, but
Yeah, it does. Right. You're right. It does get really tricky. So we will do our best to talk about discernment in these things, because what we're also going to talk about is when it's useful to take responsibility, how much responsibility we should take, and like learning the difference of like when it's helpful to and maybe when it's not helpful to. And yeah, so we'll get into that. But I know, Nick, you had a story.
Yeah, so I had a story. So like trying to it's just funny because as I've wandered my way through the different concepts of the internal emotional landscape, there's some that you or I think about and don't have a connection with right away because I'm still in it, right? But I had a disagreement with you a couple weeks ago, and
What?
Yeah.
We never fight. We're like best friends and Care Bears. Like we're happy.
And I felt victimized, which led me to lash out, like say nasty shit, right? And it was like, oh, which is
It wasn't
not
super nasty. It was
just like
a
emotionally
little
stabby.
Dirty. It was a little stabby.
Well, yeah, dirty dealing, not in good faith, right? Just
It was
like
dirty. True.
And that mechanism that led to that is very old. I'm very familiar with it because I've been there many a time. I'm not proud to say, right? So to me, it finally became clear what that was, and that was victimization. So in that moment, like I felt victimized by you as, being unfair to me, right? And if somebody is unfair, especially like, and there's probably like levels of fair, but it felt very unfair, and I interpreted it as like, an attack. And then if once I was under attack, then I'm the righteous victim, and the righteous victim has all his weapons at his disposal, right? So it's like, fuck me, no, fuck you 1,000 times. It's like
No,
all the
fuck
weapon,
you.
right?
No, fuck you.
No, fuck you.
No, fuck you.
It reminded me a little bit. I was thinking about it today, or just recently, very recently, about a conversation that I had with a coach in Australia that I worked with last year. His name was Manfred Luck. God rest his soul. Manfred went for a hike and never came
Yeah.
back on a Sunday, and I had another session with him on a Monday, and it was just like, holy shit. He just went for a walkabout. No, just like a hike. He left his, it was like a day hike.
How
Didn't
old
come
was
back.
he?
He was 76. He was an older guy, but he was like fit as a fiddle. Anyway,
Okay.
one of the things that we had talked about between me and Manfred, he did a type of sort of like regression muscle testing to get at different aspects. And one of the aspects that we had gotten in with me is this character or internal part that really hates everything. It's just like, fuck that. Like that I could look at anything, really almost anything, if I was in the right energy, and I would just be like, God, this fucking sucks. This is pathetic. You're pathetic. This is gross,
Is
And
this the same as Armageddon Boy that you've talked about? Is that kind of the
uh,
same, or is it a little
it's
different?
it's close. It is close. Um, it is close, but I'm not sure it's exactly the same.
Mm-hmm.
Just a real nastiness, and Manfred had challenged me and said, well, that's a choice, and you need to take responsibility for that. And I remember what he did. It really pissed me off. I was just like, choice? What the fuck do you know? Like, gee, you don't know what I was going through. You don't know what they did to me. You don't know how life fucked me over, you son of a bitch. It really pissed me off. It really pissed me off.
Mm. Yeah.
But then it took me 2 years, and he's dead now. But I think that I get what he was talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I decide to see the world as unfair, right? That the world is impinging itself upon me and that I am the victim, if I decide that is the truth, that there is a creative moment in that, the decision.
Right.
It's funny because in that place, at that time in my life, and for a lot of my life, I never saw or was even able to see that that is a creative moment. The decision is a creation. And that is pretty fucking subtle, that eventually, like I've been trying to like work on my vibes and think about fun things and like try to build myself up vibrationally, expose myself to information and be curious, where it's like, oh, that's what he was talking about, that there is a creative moment. And that even
Right.
though I was confused, I have been confused, that I actually do have a choice, right?
Right.
That when someone like maybe you upsets me, I don't have to decide that I'm the victim of that, right? But then it's just interesting, because how far can you take that? And the answer is as far as you can. Who knows?
Yeah.
Who fucking knows how far you can take that? And
Pretty
so,
far.
pretty far. Well, that's just the thing. What if you gave yourself a chance not to sell yourself short on that ability? Like, what could you take responsibility for? So, there's plenty of people who sort of say it this way, and I've been reading a guy recently. I can't even remember his name, Leo something, about taking 100% responsibility, right?
Mm-hmm.
For everything, even like the wild things that seem like completely out of your control, which feels a little crazy making, and maybe it's not great to go that far. But, I always think about, kind of what we talked about last week about like whatever your vibe is, like you're going to run it through all your personality, and then, you're going to have like the spirit of creativity, right? of like which way you're sort of trending and like how you could build things up, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so I go back to this kid that I was, and I imagine like the when I was talking to Manfred about this like stance that I took, I imagine myself as like a 10 or a 12-year old. That was the kind of the age that we were working at, you know. Um, and it really infected my personality and my point of view of life a lot for a long time, right? So like I have myriad examples of what that decision actually created, and it's not great, right?
Mm-hmm.
So so I think about taking responsibility. It's like I could, if I can find ways to infect my energy to shift little bits, you know, and then try to get creative. It's like how far could I take that? And the answer is I don't know, but I think that it's interesting. Plus, it's more from the victim lens. It just is such a collapsed idea of what reality can be, you know. And I'm 41, and I've like ran through all these things. Like it's like I from the collapsed victimy place, like I can see the long road ahead for me, you know.
So there was definitely a part of me that wanted to be really, really nasty back and like say like fuck you and fuck this and like really say shit that I could not come back from. And I know enough, like I've done enough on my journey to be like, don't don't listen to that impulse because that's just going to rupture things further and it's going to,
Mm.
it's not going to make things better. It's going to make things a lot worse. It might feel better for 2 milliseconds and then it's just going to be really awful. And I've also done enough work just to know that like if you have things showing up that it's not like it's an accident, it's not like it has nothing to do with you. So I'm like, I'm validating my feelings. I feel hurt. I feel betrayed. Yes, my feelings are hurt. I feel very disrespected. Like I feel all these things. Cool. Like I'm allowed to feel those things and process. And so what I did was I just decided to take some space and like feel the feels. And so my own work was like, okay, I'm aware this is part of this. I'm going to take responsibility for this. And I know in the past, I probably wouldn't have taken responsibility for it. And I would have been like, probably just made it about you or something. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure. I feel like eventually I forgive people, but I'm trying to think of how I would have handled it years ago. And I know I handle it now way better than I would
Right.
have,
Right.
before I started doing this work. Um, and what I did was I'm just like, okay, I'm curious to know where this is showing up. And just by being open and willing to take responsibility for it, I had another situation show up and it was with my mother. And I noticed that I was being stabby and passive aggressive and mean with my energy. And it was almost just like it happened really fast. It was really quick. It was like kind of subtle and it rushed in. And then I saw it and then I felt immense guilt. So I'm like, I have work to do here because I have stuff coming up. This is like the same energy and I'm the one giving it this time. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, cool, great. And then, of course, there've been a lot of like other things around like responsibility coming up. And I wanted to share that like the universal law of responsibility
Okay.
because like I believe that this is a major antidote to victimization, but I also have a couple of like victimization stories that are really interesting.
Okay.
And I don't know if I've told them on the podcast before, but you can let me know.
Sure.
The law of responsibility states that you are solely responsible for everything you are, everything you have or don't have, for everything you achieve, and for everything you become. Now, it doesn't say that you're responsible for everything that's done to you here, which maybe some people would take that further and say, just take responsibility for everything. Like you
Right.
mentioned, that guy
Yeah.
is like, take your ability to take responsibility, like take that as far as you can,
Right.
because you might actually find a lot of gold there.
Right.
Because the energy of victimization can be so seductive because it'll be like, all this stuff is happening to me and I don't have any choice. I don't have any
Mm-hmm.
power. I don't have any decisions. Like there's nothing I can do. And I think there's nothing that feels worse than powerlessness, pure
Yeah.
powerlessness. And I believe it's because it's actually so diametrically opposed to like who we really are. That's why I think it feels so shitty.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then in some situations, I think it can be really hard to take responsibility. And in some cases maybe not helpful, especially when it's like a random event, like something very
Right.
traumatic and
Right.
horrific.
Yeah.
Maybe in the moment when you're processing, like if it's something huge, like I don't worry about that. Like it's
Right.
okay to be in victimization energy because it really just means like you don't have the tools, the skills, or the resources at the moment to like step into your power, and that's fine. It's like
Right.
fine. I'll let people take care of you, figure out which way's up, like which way's north, like get your
Yeah.
bearings, come
Yes.
back to a place of regulation.
Absolutely.
And then when you're in a place of safety and you're actually surviving again and you're doing better, then you
Right.
can start to ask those questions and move into thriving. Like, don't try to jump from this place of like something really bad happened. Let me take full responsibility for all of this like awfulness. It's
Yes.
like not really
No. No.
necessary
No.
when you're
Yeah.
in that place.
Yeah. There are some times when you need to fight or flight. You need to just like get
Yeah.
somewhere safe and do whatever the fuck you got to do to like, you know, get away from whatever bad is happening. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So some of these stories, and I have like 3 stories now, but like so many stories that are popping up in my head. But one of them refers to when people become victimized in certain situations, and um, like our autonomic nervous system, your nervous system will make choices based on survival, like what the best outcome is, and that might mean fight, flight, freeze, fawn, like
Mm-hmm.
whatever.
Yes.
And so your nervous system will make that decision in a moment to keep you safe. But sometimes that means you may freeze in a moment when you want to fight because your nervous system has decided that freezing will give you the best chance of survival in that moment. And then that
Mm-hmm.
can bring a lot of shame and you can be victimized in that state. And that can be really hard to work with, even though it's not your fault. That part of that is your nervous system just responding quickly in the moment to the
Sure.
strategy
Yeah.
that is come to rely on, that has worked potentially not just for you but for generations, like an entire lineage, right?
Sure.
So it can take a lot to overcome that. I have 2 stories that are really interesting about victimization, and one is I worked with this guy, and I feel like I've told this story before, but I'll keep it short. I worked with this guy who told me that he would be standing on the train platform like in New York, and he would have at
Mm.
least a couple times he had random people come up to him and like smack him in the head, like attack him for no apparent reason. And so I asked him, we were just at work, and like I was still like doing my coaching training and stuff, but I was like, I'm really curious to know, is this familiar for you? Like anywhere in your childhood, did you ever have anyone randomly just walk up to you and just wallop you for no reason? And he was like, oh my God, like my mom used to do that a lot. And I'm like, there you go. That's why it's happening. Cause he was like, I don't understand why this is happening or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, so it keeps happening, right? Because of this. And I think I weirded him out and he like kind of ignored, like tried to stay away from me after that. So I was like, maybe I went into I went in too hard. Um, and this story is also very unusual, but it kind of speaks to what happens on a subconscious level, because we can be victimized like on a conscious level, but we can have under unconscious psychological underpinnings
Right.
as to why we find ourselves in situations that it's like a victim abuse cycle, okay,
Right. Yes.
which then becomes very complex and complicated
Mm-hmm.
and can carry a lot of pain and shame, and then resistance to trying to understand, because on likely it's likely it's not your fault on some level that that's happening, but it's like when you understand that it isn't necessarily your fault, but that it is your responsibility to take care of yourself and understand why that's happening, and then
Mm-hmm.
stand up for yourself, almost like the parent that should have or could have protected you, when you step into that role for yourself, you can end those cycles. So there was this one woman, I wasn't friends with her, but my um, former partner was, and she had actually uh, been raped like several times, but it was happening in like the downtown DC area. But the more that he spoke to her and learned about her, he found out that she would go walking out in dark alleys at like 2, 3 a.m. in the city. And then these things would happen to her. So it was like when hearing about these things from like a zoomed out perspective, there's like, I think most people would just be like, well, that's interesting, right? Like there's something interesting about that story. Where it's like, yes, of course. Is she necessarily asking to be victimized just because she's doing that? No, but why? Like, so then you have to start asking questions. And that always stuck with me because I was like, and this was before, I think this was like when I first started studying psychology, or maybe like around that time. And so it really interested me and fascinated me as to her unique trauma and like why she was putting herself in those circumstances even after it already happened like one or two times. Like it was like she was still doing it. So
Mm-hmm.
I do think there's some aspect of like repetition compulsion and the subconscious trying to master certain situations, and that can even occur through victimization.
Well, I think
Those were
that
the stories.
the subconscious parts, wounded, traumatized parts, and the sort of the IFS model, it's like what
Mm-hmm.
portion of those like embody like stories of victimization, right? Probably many or all of them. And so it's like how much of your trauma lives underneath the surface? Most of it. And then
Mm-hmm.
you have all these things, until you make the conscious, you'll call it fate, or
Mm-hmm.
you'll
It will direct your life and you will call it fate.
you'll direct your life and you'll call it fate, right? I also think about like the Hawkins like scale of energetics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, those types of agreements or just conclusions about the world are very, I would say, very low on the energetic scale, right? And I also think that there's moments like just because of like the dynamics of time, like it's happening all the time. If you have these uh, visions or versions of how planet Earth works below your conscious level that are sort of imbued with this point of view that it's very low vibrationally, and then they come and express through you again the conscious creative moment with the energy that's available through the way that they see the world is going to be not great, right? These are not
Right.
great
So you're going
creations.
to create, yeah, because you can create either from an unconscious place. So all those things beneath the surface, your
Right.
patterns, your trauma actually having creative force because it directs your life and you just think it's
Yes.
fate. Because it's like whether you take responsibility for your creations or not, it's like you are creating, you are a creator.
Right. So I was walking on the track yesterday, and it's like an Abraham Hicks thing. She just says, think about gratitude, but then think about fun. Fun seemed like a easy thing to like hang out at, right? So there
Mhm.
I am walking around the track, and yesterday, like I was feeling pretty low energy, right? Pretty fucking low. So
Mhm.
like thinking about fun, and there's like from that place, that low place, the fun didn't exist. There was no
Mhm.
fun. Like it was
Yeah.
pretty hard. I was just like, it was just like blank. It was just like an equation that didn't work. And so I'm like, okay, there just wasn't anything. And so one of the things I did, like I was kind of like walking slow and like, I'm kind of stiff anyway. Here I am walking. I'm like a couple miles in. I'm all sweaty and I'm like kind of feeling low. I don't really want to be there. So I just decided to act more like I was feeling. And so I kind of like hung my arms low and I was just like, oh. And I was just like,
Were you doing this on the
oh.
track?
and I was just like walk like a zombie and like was like, and then that made me laugh. Like that made me fucking laugh, and I was just like, oh, that was pretty fun. And then like I felt the energy come up a little bit, and then like I just started having a thought about something, and I was just like, and I'm checking back in. Is this fun? I'm like, yeah, this is fun, and it just spiraled up just a little bit, and I was like, oh,
Oh,
right.
oh, you followed an impulse because you were thinking about fun,
I was
and then
thinking
you
about
had the
fun.
thought.
Yeah, I just was like, well, just be what it is, like, and then like when
Hmm.
I started getting playful, then that the playfulness like started to p- proliferate, and so I don't
Pro,
know,
pro,
proliferate,
proliferate.
Plur-
La la la.
uh, so I don't know. I thought that was just a pretty interesting movement, right? Because I could have been like, yeah, fun. I don't want to fucking think about fun. I could have gone into anger, or I could have gone into the creative, going with that creative thing, trending downward, really. Because then,
That's
like,
almost like old man get off my lawn energy. Get
oh
off
yeah,
my lawn, you son of a
it's
bitch.
so funny. Parked. Me and another guy parked near the restaurant today for lunch in front of this guy, and he's like, the mailman wants 30 feet to park the mail truck. And I was like, sir, the mailman actually just went by. He's like, I'm like, and I opened up his mailbox. I'm like, there's mail in there. He's like, poor guy. But yes, it is kind of that. It's very curmudgeon-y, right? If
Mhm.
you go with the conclusion, just take it for what it is, and then go with victimization, right? Because if I am victimized, if I don't have any power there, then that's a very super logical conclusion. And all the
Mhm.
time, I mean, like, if that's the way that I think, if that's like my conclusion point, if that's like how I actually use my see, that's which I think is the wild thing too about how much creativity you're participating in all the time.
Right. Well, a
Like,
little scary to think of, isn't it,
it's
actually?
super. It's actually super scary because if you start to open yourself up to what your ability is to actually take responsibility for,
Mhm.
then which I don't know. Like I don't want to get into that like that being scary. It's like
Oh, not scary, but it's almost like the idea of it being scary is if you let it remain unconscious and
right.
then like that. I don't know.
Well, like so I go back to the 12-year-old version of me, right? That made that decision at that point. And it's like I have to be a little bit forgiving and like also understanding like okay, kid, I mean you did your best. And it's like it's okay that like that had to happen. Nobody was there to like show me a different way or to like model
Mhm.
something else. And that even that me going into victimization there, starting to hate everybody. I mean, where does that come from? That's from 15,000 generations away. That particular thread that comes to me,
Yeah.
whatever it is. So
Yeah.
that's okay. I think that it's good to stay consistent in just curiosity and compassion for yourself when you find yourself participating once again in something,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. And you hit on something that I was just about to say, which is like where do the victim stories come from? And like how they become really pervasive, like in there's generational trauma that gets
Right.
passed down. And then there's certain limiting beliefs and victim stories. So if you look at your parents and how they felt victimized, like what are their victim stories?
Right.
They're very likely your victim stories too,
Hmm.
is you'll end up creating that. But it's like
I also think
something
about the
else.
juice that we get out of it too, because there is juice.
Yeah.
There is some positive reinforcement. For a hot second, you can feel fucking righteous, and you can feel like, yeah,
Hmm.
this is right. But it's like I'm in my 40s. It's like I've done it now 10 billion thousand times, and I know what I get out of it, right? Which is death and destruction, disconnection, pain and not creativity.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting for me to think about like where victimization comes from. Like what is why is that energy useful? Where does it come from? Like how does it arise? And I think it arises from pain and a feeling of not being able to do anything about it. And I think a lot of it probably arises um, from those ages when we're entirely dependent on our parents
Yeah,
for
we're born into this world
care,
needing things, right? Like
right? And
we need.
emotional processing.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so, oh my God, you just reminded me of something today that like, I was communicating with one of my clients and I'm going to make this carousel on, it's kind of like victimization energy and like dating, but it's like it's talking about entitlement because like when we're born like we have to have an energy of entitlement to survive. It's almost like anything, any creature has like, I don't know what other way to explain it, but it's like an instinct. It's a drive to survive. So there
Mm-hmm.
is like an entitlement to life that is there innately.
Okay.
But if we don't have like, think about being a baby and not having that entitlement energy, like not crying, not reaching out, not having tantrums.
Yeah, it's called failure to thrive.
Right. And then you would just die. So
You
it's
just
like
die.
entitlement is super important. But then what happens when we have entitlement, like we have those drives to survive, but then we're not responded to, then we have
Mm-hmm.
wounding around that where we were powerless but needed something, right?
Right. Yeah.
So then I think that can set up some victimization or victim stories or
Oh, for
energies
sure.
around I was entitled, I need, I'm powerless, and then I didn't get, and then we can carry that through, like baggage into adulthood.
Yeah.
And this is a whole other conversation, but it's like bringing that entitlement into our dating scenarios or our relationships
Mm.
can not be very sexy because then it's like that person that you're chatting to, like the intensity is super high. They have a
Mm-hmm.
lot of expectations. They have this childlike entitlement that's left over from that trauma and they're bringing it. They're like, I need this from you right away and I need it now. And if you're not going to show up and step up, well, then like, fuck you. Right. And it's like, whoa. Right. Holy
Yeah.
shit.
Whoa.
Right. And so it's like the victimization, that energy, like that wounding, that pain can be like so close to the surface and it can like evade you because when you don't know whose responsibility is what, like if you lack discernment around attuning to those emotions and realizing they're there or realizing that that trauma is there and that you're trying to get those needs met by this person, perhaps someone you've only known for 2 hours or 2 weeks or whatever you met on a website.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like trying to get them to like heal your wounds or make you feel better. Well, then you're bringing codependent patterns. You're bringing that victimization and
Right.
power dynamics into
Yeah.
a dating situation.
Yeah.
And that can be like a big blind spot for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why is victimization energy so tricky? Why is it so blind spotty?
Yeah. That's a good question.
Do
Why, Nick? Tell us. What do you think?
I don't know. Part of me thinks because it feels very seductive, right? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
there's some kind of energy in giving away your energy that you don't have to take responsibility. So it's like, oh, I don't have to do anything because it's your fault. It's the world's fault. It's God's fault. But like that,
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of. I think it's sort of a denial of our own power, right? It
Mm-hmm.
makes me think about this one thing. Maybe this doesn't stick or something. But it was that David. What's his name? David. David Attenborough.
Set sub S
Yeah,
word.
David S. Word's podcast.
Settlage.
Sutledge. That's right. He was talking about people will definitely open up and tell their deepest, darkest like pains and like traumas and all the ways they like have fucked up, you know, like people like
Mm-hmm.
in his experience, people have no problem doing that. But when you ask people like, okay, what are your gifts? How do you want to change the world? You know,
Mm,
they super struggle. Okay,
right.
so I
Yeah.
think it almost mirrors what I'm sort of like talking about. That it's like, oh, you just gotta like give it up. It's like, oh, I don't have any power. Oh, I'm the victim. It's like, as opposed to thinking of like, oh, I do have power. Oh, I can change
Right.
things. Oh, I do have abilities. Oh, I do have talents. I do have creativity, you know? Like imagining and being creative and like opening yourself up to the actual good is scarier than the pain.
It sounds to me like it's a bit of learned helplessness, like what you're talking about, like almost like practicing victimization stories, being so much into pain, going around and around about what's wrong, and like habituating where
Yes.
your focus is. So then it's like it becomes a way of being, it becomes a personality, it
Right.
becomes
Yes.
like part of our identification and our character. And
Yes.
then when you vibrate there for so long,
Yeah, then it's
when
just,
you go to success, when you go to hope, when you go to purpose, it's like so far fucking over there. It's like, what? It's like I haven't been able to survive long enough to even consider thriving. So all I have is my story about how I'm barely getting by, right?
right. Well,
But I wanted to
we've,
say something really
no,
quickly.
that's fine.
Well,
Go,
do
yeah.
do you, okay.
Well, we've talked about energetic systems, you know, and if you peak out, you know, then your system maybe can't handle it, and they'll be like, oh, you'll fall
Oh,
quickly. You'll have like
right.
a backlash, you know.
Yeah, like doing a big energetic leap or having a huge expansion this way
Right.
can mean that like suddenly the contrast that you're experiencing is so like holy shit, like especially did we talk about this last one? The we did, I think, on the last podcast where I was like, yeah, if you want to ruin someone's life, like give them a taste of something that they think they can't get on their own, like they like to a state they can't get to on their own. It's like only through an external, you know, drug or substance or process can they get here. Well, when they have a taste of that and then they're down here most of the time, they're in a low place. It's like knowing that those heightened senses or those huge feelings of being alive, like juxtaposed with like victimization and suffering and shame, is fucking shitty. It feels even worse when you start to get a taste of what's good. It is like such a major catalyst. Well, I mean, it can be an amazing catalyst for evolution if it doesn't destroy you.
Hmm.
Um, but something that I was going to say is, what was the question you asked? You said, why? Oh, why is victimization so blind spotty? Right?
Yeah.
Oh my God, what was I going to say? I was going to say, I actually think it's way more instinctive. I think it has more to do with drives, actually. And I had a better explanation. I'm going to see if I can like talk it through. Because so my thought is, okay, for example, if you like stub your toe on a rock or something and you're like, fuck, ow, pain, right? There was this little Instagram thing I saw. This girl, she was like walking and she hit one of those side mirrors and then she turned around and like bit the side mirror. So she like attacked it. And so I think that victimization has more like protective mechanisms in it than we think. One is it protects our own energy and can actually help us stay alive and preserve, you know,
Hmm.
especially like when you think about fight or flight and freeze energy and fawn energy, these are all actually like flavors of victimization, like
Yeah. Okay.
energy in some way, right?
Right.
So it's like I need to fight to protect myself
Hmm.
from the enemy. So then I'm like a victim in some way, right?
Right.
um, or I need to run away or pass out, or, you know, I need to lay very still,
Hmm.
or I need to like over caretake and like fawn. So I actually think that victimization can kind of be like these drawn out, like being in those states over and over again
Yeah.
will
Habituated.
will be
Right.
habituated
Right.
victimization modes, because then those modes are the modes of like simply survival. Like they're very
Mm-hmm.
animalistic, they're very driven. And when you think about other emotions that are like higher than those, so you get above anger, let's say you break through the anger threshold, like that gateway, and you end up into like cooperation. Well, if you notice when you get into cooperation, you're past the adversarial mode. So when you don't have an adversary, like when there's not a bad guy or an adversary, when there's simply love and compassion and cooperation, it eliminates the need for victimization. It's like you are now energetic equals with the people around you. You're not in a one down position while there are people up here. Like shit isn't rolling downhill onto you, right? So there's just like a shift and a flavor once you're out of these like survival places, that you're able to like just access these other states
Yeah.
where it's like the power dynamics have actually shifted when you're able to break through anger and actually use that anger as power, and realize that maybe you're not defeating an adversary, maybe you're simply a competitor. Like maybe you are simply like competing against yourself and like old versions of yourself and how you used to respond or react in like survival, those places of survival. And but I think that we don't want to eradicate victimization. I think that victimization does have like necessary things like for us, like if you get hurt, like you want to take care of that, right? And it can have like a victim sort of flavor, like
Yeah.
ow, I'm in pain, and that causes like that kind of posture. Let
Right.
me take care of this, let me devote energy
Yeah.
towards that.
Well, I think obviously it exists and it exists in tons of people. So it's a natural process of how
Yeah.
life works, right? Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, like you're talking about those sort of like the biological sympathetic nervous system, sort of like enmeshment, like where it's missing. Like, and yes, I can think that. So the main state I existed in all the time was sort of a dissociated freeze, right? But it makes a lot of sense. It absolutely makes sense. I am going to dissociated freeze because here in the actual world, in the present, that I'm powerless, that I hold no power and hold no sway and can get nothing of fun that I enjoy, right? So I'll just go to the imaginary place. At least in my
Mm.
imagination, like I can, pacify myself, but that's sort of like, so, yeah, like yeah, I don't know. It just makes me think about more of like the place a person's going to be in to be able to start to, because I think overcoming your deep habituated self, or even becoming
Mm-hmm.
starting to have consciousness and awareness of it is it's a whole undertaking for your life, really, when you start on that journey. And then okay, so then finding cracks about like maybe where you could start to play around with it. Like it's taken me quite a while listening to fucking Abraham Hicks and like, to actually start to play with it, right? And then watch energy change a little bit. It's like, to find like a time when there was much going on with me and like I had this information in my brain, just like poking buttons in my system, to see what happens, and then essentially got lucky, and then have all these dominoes fall in my brain because I've just been exposing myself about like trying to like learn and like
Mm-hmm.
understand and grok and feel about what's happening. So, which I think is a pretty cool place to be for me. Like, good job, me. Great, that's great. Like,
Good job,
like,
Nick.
like I didn't crack the fucking code yet. I had a couple laps of like smiling, but like, well, you got to start somewhere, right? But to start to
That's
see
good.
how the pieces are put together, right? And about like where I am and how I have been habituated has created the life that I have now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I think about also it's really normal to forget that we are animals. Like we are human animal and
Hmm.
we are human spirit,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that when we're in those survival places, we are much more human animal, living in a lot of those instinctive, like
Oh,
perhaps
absolutely.
more
Absolutely.
animalistic like emotions, right? Like this,
Yeah.
there's a certain emotional range that is that goes from like shame and I don't know if they've studied if they know that animals have shame per se, but if you look at dogs, it seems as though they do because they're
Seems like it.
socialized. It
Yeah.
really does, right? But I don't know if that's us projecting human emotions onto animals. I'm not sure,
I don't know.
but when I love animals. Like anyone that follows me on Instagram knows that I
You've
always
been on the
post
real animal.
for quite I love animals. I love cute I love all animals pretty much. And so I put them in my stories, and it's just like watching animals like experience bliss, and I feel like animals do experience like these emotions. And something that Abraham Hicks talks about is like that animals do experience like well-being like pretty easily if they're, I think, for the
Mm,
most part, depending, right?
right.
And anyway, there's just so many interesting things that come into my brain when I think about talking about animals and like the law of attraction and things like that, and like what their purpose is here on earth, and if they have like dharma and karma as well, like all that's really fascinating. But um, it is interesting to think about like the intersection of human animal and human spirit, and like how those two like function together synergistically, but also sometimes like how human animal takes over, like how instinct takes over, and then how we
Yeah.
can have awareness of those mechanisms happening and then have emotions about those things, like shame about the way we responded to something, or
Mm-hmm.
have these animalistic like sexual drives that we can't explain, and then be like,
Yeah.
oh, should I not be feeling this? And
Right.
it just makes me think of like how complicated human history is, like since like I kind of want to blame the Victorian era. Like who knows when it took a turn, but there's this one play, it's known as the dildo play, I believe, and it's about how women in like the Victorian era would experience hysteria, and then they would basically go to a specialist that had like this fucking like Sibian machine or like dildo machine,
Right. And
and
they
they would
just
pretty
get them
much
off a few times.
they would masturbate them,
Yeah.
and then they would have an orgasm, and they'd be like, oh my god, I feel better. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like they weren't talking about that. And it's just funny, like, you know I just think it's very, I don't know, I just think stuff like that's really interesting. And I just think about how we have these social and cultural codes around things that exist in nature that we don't allow ourselves to feel, do, be, express. And of course, we have social contract, and obviously there's things that you just don't do.
Yeah.
Like we don't want to act like bonobo monkeys. We don't want to fling poo at each other or randomly just go and
Right.
hump everyone like that. That's like boundaryless. But we are in a unique predicament slash experiment slash discovery, being humans and like
Mm.
experiencing emotion and learning to emotionally surf. Like first learning that you have feelings, like learning how to feel, especially those that have had severe emotional neglect and punishment. Like there can be a lot of victimization around emotions or feeling emotions, period. Or even like being able to talk to somebody, like even that can feel shameful and overwhelming. So we can hold a lot of patterns of victimizations and of victimization in almost any life area. So any
Mm-hmm.
life area where you feel powerless, there
Right.
are going to be lower vibrational, energetic, emotional stories about how you are powerless, how you are stuck, how you are a victim, how it's them and this and the other. And the more that we're able to, and of course, you're not going to be able to do this at once, but the more you're able to take responsibility for each of those areas, you can start to clean up your energy and then gain more energy, because you do have a choice in all these different areas, like your sleep, what you eat, who you
Mm.
fuck, like whatever. You have choices. And if you refuse to make a choice or make decisions, life will make that for you, or your unconscious will make it for you. So you will either live a life by default or one of your own creation. What's it going to be? What you want to do? I just got carried away.
Yeah.
I got all excited there.
I don't know. Like, I like the rant. I do. But in full victimization, that's complete gobbledygook what you said, right? Like, I
Yes.
think without an experience of seeing a way out and seeing how it actually works, right? If
Yeah,
you
you're
if
right.
if you don't believe in the power of your own creative process and have like a knowing or like an interface with it, if you don't know any of that shit, like
Yeah.
like
Yes, I'm full of shit, right? Like I'm a
yeah.
charlatan and I'm like peddling shit nuggets. Like I'm
Well,
literally like
not it's
selling
just non sequitur,
crap.
you know. It's just non sequitur shit, like you know.
Or it's like can't relate to it, but not
It
only
just doesn't
that,
make
it's like
sense, you know. It's just like
swatting
no.
it away. Get it the fuck away.
Well, like
Um,
it doesn't even have to be annoying. It's just like what? Like it doesn't make like it makes no sense. It makes no
right.
sense.
No, you're right. Like, yeah, from one perspective, it's almost like um yeah, it's almost like looking at things from different dimensions. So
Yeah, it
something that's
is.
1D is a vast difference from something that is 2D and then 3D and then
Yeah.
4D. It's like the more dimensions there are, it's like this is really wild, It ends up getting really
I actually think that's a pretty good analogy. It's just because if you see something, if you see an extra dimensional thing from the place you are,
right.
it's gobbledygook. It makes no sense
It
to
doesn't
like
even compute to your brain
right.
because let's say let's say we were two-dimensional beings living in we're on a cartoon, we're on a page, and
Yeah.
everything is just two-dimensional, which is even
Yeah.
hard to think of from where we are. It's like even a little tough to think about it, but we can sort of like we have examples of things that are 2D and we can sort of,
All right.
play with that. But then imagine being a 2D thing and then going to 3D and what that would do to your brain when suddenly it's like you're like, I don't know, just try to think about that. Like that can kind of give you a little taste of how much that will just like mess with your brain a bit to be like, wait a second, what? Like how many different things are introduced when you take something from 2D to 3D? You know? Like that's an interesting question.
So, which is hard to do. In the Flatlanders, they did it from 3 to 2 because that was actually easier because you could
What is that?
describe.
What is Flatlanders?
Flatlanders is the book about dimensions.
Oh, yeah. I
So
don't.
he describes a world of 2D, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so, like looking through their eyes, it's just like blip or no blip, and it just has width. So it's like if you see your buddy, he'll start off as a dot, but he gets closer. He's just is this line that gets bigger, right? Then he'll go away in 2D world when you see things, and
Wow.
everything is just like like it's just these lines, because there is
Linear.
no right.
Oh,
And then
yeah, that's
when the 3D thing comes, right? It's like all the series of dots because it's like it's this multi-dimensional thing entering in from the top or the bottom or from whichever direction
you
to the
never had
flatland.
top or bottom before.
Yeah, to the Flatlanders, it was just fuzz. They couldn't make any sense out of it, right? Like it didn't like they perceived something, right? But it was in patterns that they couldn't recognize at all.
It makes me
It's
wonder if we could have like a TV show that was called Flatlanders.
I think there probably
Like,
is. I mean, it's a pretty
would
famous
that
book.
work?
It's a pretty famous book, and it was written like probably 40 years ago. So I think about writing cartoons, making cartoons,
Mm-hmm.
and so like you were talking about the social aspects and about how we are animals and how we live in packs, which is all that's true, and that's another dimension of trying to understand how we work. I like to think about some kind of a cartoon about the inner landscape, just of like parts of inner emotional parts, right? And so I was thinking today that like you think you're a human being, walking down the street, and it's like, no, you're more than that. And so you actually have 6 heads, you have like 11 hearts, you have like 40 arms, right? And they each are doing different things, and I would have to like model it after myself or whatever, And this is how you
Okay.
actually work, right? So it's like, then this 6-headed, 5-hearted, 11-armed me is like walking through, and then something happens, right? It's like Angela yells at me, and then like it goes in, and the victimization head ears hears that, goes to like the victimization heart, tells a certain story, and then my arms could be the sort of protectors, like lights up this whole circuit that happens, right? In
Mm-hmm.
that part. And then, okay, that moment ends, and I walk this six-headed or five-headed, five-hearted, 11-armed guy, like walks to the next situation, and it lights up a different circuit, right? But here, all the time, you thought you were just one person, and you are one person. It's subtle, like it's like, but you have all of these different parts and pieces inside of you that are working
Just,
all the time.
just sounds like the worst case of being like a conjoined twin or something, you know?
Yes, it
Like,
would look like that. Like it's going to be a wild cartoon, but I think it'd be like an interesting way of describing like the processes that happen.
right.
And some way to
I'm
like show how hidden it is too, like that there are parts that
right.
are like above, and you could do that with some type of like trick. They're transparent or they're purple or something or whatever.
I'm very interested in learning more about this concept. But I was thinking from what you were saying, for someone that is feeling very identified and meshed, blended with victimization. So then it's like, what are some tips, tools, whatever that we can offer from our own experience to come out of it?
I think really it's just about, to me, it seems only energetic. Like
Mm-hmm.
there are some just like conclusions out of it that like I don't want to get that juice, or the thing that helped me was seeing what I got out of it. And what I got out of victimization very recently was that it's a carte blanche for me then to hurt people, which is not,
Mm-hmm.
it's not
Which
an
then
act.
blows up relationships, and
It
then it's
blows.
like,
It just it leads to all sorts of bad behavior. So like that distinction, thinking about that, and like I don't know if that works for other people in other people's lives, right?
mm-hmm.
But that's like, I think it's more helpful to think about it just in terms of energy, right? So it's like if I'm feeling down, if I'm feeling like this thing sucks, it's like okay, well, so for me, it just happened to think about like what are things that are fun, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
feel my energy and try to like work on my energy. So I'm like out walking, moving my body, still feeling like shit. I'm like the zombie walking around. How can I move my energy? Which is like a whole other topic to learn about, like moving energy, right? What is energy
Right.
like? What is energy respond to? So I have
Mm-hmm.
been curious and playing around and just got lucky one day. The next day or tomorrow, I might be like really have my fucking head up my ass and just be like a real bummer, like I'm still surfing the wind, like I'm I don't know if I'm in total control, trying to get some control, just trying to get more creative and get like some a
Right.
sense of a sense of like a sense of skill with it.
You know, it's very interesting because it's almost like that sense of control is like kind of,
Yeah.
I want to say it's a little bit illusory in some ways, but not. Like it's like the more consciousness you're able to bring, like the
Yeah.
more you're able to stay in the present moment, which means checking back in with like what is
Yeah.
can be a decent way to sort of come out of victimization. But oh my God, it's like, it's such a process when I think about it, because I remember specifically a time where I literally felt like I was being shit on by God, like that I had done
Sure.
something really bad to piss God off. And he had like, has, of course, because he's God, he has like a giant butthole, and he just sort of opened it and like was just
Rain
raining
shit upon you.
diarrhea on me. And so I was like just drowning in this sea of all. And so like all the things that happened during that time were like, my my dog got a bladder infection and was like peeing blood. So I had to like take her to the vet. So there was that. My computer hard drive crashed. The guy I was dating like suddenly dumped me with almost no explanation. It wasn't like straight up ghosting, but almost. My mom like visited me and like drove me crazy. Like she got into a fight with my roommate, and then my roommate like we had a huge fight, and then I had to like kick my roommate out. And then what else? Oh, my like retina detached. So it was just like, and then I got sued. Like there was just like period of time where like all this stuff was just exploding.
You see,
And
God is shitting on me.
See, but I was like, well, I was like, what did I do? Like that was my first thought was what did I do wrong?
Yeah, which is that's
Right?
victim, right? What did I do
What did
wrong?
I do wrong?
I must have
Because
done something wrong.
my orientation, like realizing like the way I was raised and how I was
Yeah.
punished and different things, and also just I was brought up in the Catholic Church, and then we had switched to Baptist, and there can be, in my opinion, a lot of focus on victimization as well as like martyrdom in religion, and
Yeah.
that can get very confusing. Like, don't piss off God, please God. And like that makes me think of the Bruce Almighty thing. Like God is just like a mean kid with a magnifying glass, like burning my limbs off so he can watch me squirm or whatever that quote
Right.
is. And I know it can really feel like that. It can, and I think what I didn't understand is that when there's a vortex of things that we're creating, I think you can also like have a negative vortex, or because you can create from a place of unconsciousness and keep
Sure.
attracting more and more and
Yeah.
more. And
Absolutely.
then when you're focusing on feelings of victimization and that helplessness and powerlessness, then you will find more things to
Yeah.
keep going. But what ended up happening actually, and I've been like starting to understand this like more and more and more. But what really happened was it kind of broke me open, like it broke me in a way. Because when my retina detached and then I had to have surgery, and then during that surgery, they didn't administer the anesthesia quite right, and I could feel the surgery, but I couldn't move. So that was really tough. Just a lot of things happened, and then suddenly I'm trying to remember exactly what happened. I don't remember everything, but I do remember that I was sitting up in my loft and I was reading this email, and there was like an invitation to come to fly out to LA to go to this seminar. And I felt like I have to go there. I need to go there. I must. And I will quit my job if they won't let me go, because I was like a new bartender at Budokan in New York. And then from there, like all kinds of shit started happening, like synchronicity. I started seeing angel numbers, and I thought I was going a little crazy. And then it was like my energy started to move up, like naturally, because I had hit such like a rock bottom place.
Mm.
And then I was sort of creating, but I wasn't super aware of how I was doing it, but I was seeing it. And so it's very interesting just to use your power of observation to notice what you create from what state. That can kind of help, but
Mm-hmm.
I do think that one of the biggest things that we can do or practice is non-resistance. Like as much as like I think maybe, I don't know if this is too high of a level, but doing your best to like feel shit and like not constrict and tighten, like seeing what you can actually allow yourself to feel without shutting it off, just as much as you can tolerate, and just starting to practice a little bit, I think can be helpful. But there's a saying like all roads lead to Rome, and I believe that all roads can lead to God, just meaning that like all roads can lead to your like elevated consciousness, your expansion, your evolution. So I just think there's a million different ways to do this, obviously. And I think it comes from doing your best to just follow those little glints of joy, or what you were saying, Nick, is like fun, like trying to find the little things and just see how long you can sort of play with that and milk with that. And then when you're having a shitty day or you're feeling like you're in victimization, just be like, I'm here, this is okay, here I am. Like I think part of it is just being like, this is where I am right now and this is okay. And that I can see how that can be a challenge too, like because when we're in victimization, like we don't want to be there in that place because it doesn't feel very good. But incidentally, I think it ends up being the cause of suffering can be constriction or pushing away reality instead of trying to accept it for what it is in the moment, because pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. I think that was Buddha that said that. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot of different ways to try to wiggle your way out. But I also think that for me, what started helping was recognizing like that I needed therapy. My realization that I needed therapy came from the fact that I recognized that I was having emotions and I didn't always know what they were. And it would take me 2 weeks sometimes to be like, oh, that feeling, I was uncomfortable and hence probably should have said no to that thing. Right. And then I ended up in awkward situations because I couldn't feel my emotions. So when I started doing therapy, that helped me to start feeling and thus like began part of that journey. So
Yeah, perception. I think it's a good message just to tell people that like that there is other shit. There is something else, right?
right.
There
So
is
like
another
faith and
dimension.
hope, there are other perspectives, there are other dimensions. So when you find yourself like there, if by accident or even whatever, like if you find yourself there, then like try to enjoy it best you can and then don't punish yourself when you're not.
Right. Amen.
Hmm.
Okay, pretty good. Good podcast.
Yeah, we're done.
I think so.
Is
I'm
that all
running
you
out
need
of
to say?
steam.
Feel good? Okay. Cool. All right. Yeah, we can
I'm
finish.
a little on the blink. Anyway, come say hi, leave us a comment, do the thing, doobly do. You know what to do. You know what I'm saying?
Really.
All right. So emotional.
Wait,
You got
okay,
anything
so
else?
the I was just gonna say thanks for listening. The links will be below, and then you can
Yeah,
follow us on social media
people
and
know
leave a
all that shit.
review. No, like what if they're new here and they don't?
Nobody's new to the internet. Everybody's been here
No, to
forever.
this podcast. They're new
Oh,
to us.
well, we're at like an hour and whatever we're in. If they like, like I always, if I'm listening to somebody and they've like got my attention, like I'll start clicking
Mm-hmm.
around on them. And of course,
Okay.
it's other shit's down in there.
So you're saying they're gonna figure it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
All right.
we have a smart audience. They're
You know,
smart
you're right.
people.
Our audience is smart.
Yeah,
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 I feel that.
cool.
Cool. Y'all know what to do. We trust you.
Absolutely, we do.
If you've made it this far, you're really smart.
Maybe.
Or somewhat. Who knows?
All right.
All right.
Thank you,
Bye.
Bye. Hey, what the fuck?
I'm recording it 'cause it's funny.
Oh, Jesus, my Lord, what have you done to me? God damn it, Jesus, I was doing all right till you came along. I had so much good going on, but then you pulled out the rug and I went down so goddamn hard. Oh, Jesus, goddamn, you ruined my life.
Oh my god.
Well, a dog died and my lady took a hike and my job sucks, so they fired me. Oh, Jesus, Lord and Savior of my misery.
What was the verse around the jet ski? Sing that one.
Goddamn, I wanted that jet ski. Have you ever seen someone unhappy on a jet ski? Well, I don't have one, 'cause of Jesus. He took it away from me.
All right. That's called the victimization song.
Oh, Jesus, why? God damn.
You know what? When I'm having a really low day and I'm feeling victimized, I will probably sing along with the song and be like, yeah.
God damn. Jesus, why do
It's accurate. Accurate. All right. Amen.